concern for renewable energy and sustainability continues to bring Taiwan and the United States closer together. We know that in 2012, the U.S. was the largest importer of Taiwanese modulars. So developing renewable energy solutions is of the utmost importance for Taiwan. But climate change is still a global challenge. That requires global cooperation and global solutions. We will learn today about what role renewable energy can play as we strive for sustainability and a healthier world. So without further ado, let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Su, the Deputy Director General of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Alista Eckert, Executive Director of ACUNS, to introduce the keynote speakers.
Thank you very much. Let me quickly say thank you to Brian and to Yitso and all the team at Tacony for all their. If I take my glasses off, I can actually see the back of the room where Yitso is standing. Say thank you to everybody for their support in running all of our seminars. The last couple of years we've worked together, 2.5 years now. And we're looking forward to developing our program for 2014, which we'll be letting everybody know about in short order as well. So thank you very much to them. Very short advert for ACUNS. ACUNS is the Professional Scholarly Association of academics and practitioners interested in or working on the United Nations. It's an education-oriented, non-governmental organization, NGO. Our name is the Academic Council on the United Nations, not of it, so we're not part of it. We're an independent NGO, and about 600 individuals, 65 institutions in 50-plus countries around the world, people interested in the UN and in contemporary issues of global governance. So anybody who wants to find out more about us can have a look at our website or talk to myself or, where's Brenda? Stand up and wave. Brenda's the ACUNS coordinator, and she can talk to anybody who wants to find out more about us, and we have some publications in the back of the room as well. Let me introduce then our two speakers today. One new to me and one not so new to me, but always a pleasure to deal with Michael. Michael Gerard will be speaking to us today, first on the importance of new energy technology in fighting climate change. Michael is the director of the Center for Climate Change Law in Columbia University. Many of you may know him if you've been working or have had any interest in the field of climate change law. He is the most prominent American lawyer working here and one of the most prominent lawyers, litigators in the world working on environmental law issues. Michael is extremely prolific writer on environmental law. I'll just do a couple of highlights, and you don't want to hear me, you want to hear them. So I'll do a couple of highlights and get out of your way. Two of his books have been named the best law book of the year by the American Association of Publishers, Environmental Law Practice Guide and Brownfield's Law and Practice. His recent books are the second edition of The Law of Environmental Justice and Global Climate Change and U.S. Law. The latter has been adopted as required reading for many, if not most, law school courses on climate change. Michael was the 2004-05 chair of the American Bar Association's 10,000-member section of Environment, Energy and Resources. He's also chaired the executive committee of the New York City Bar Association and the environmental law section of the New York State Bar Association. He is regularly ranked as I mentioned, either the single leading environmental lawyer in New York or tied for first. I'm going to say he ranks as first. Michael bridges the public interest and corporate worlds. His law practice is largely involved helping large corporations and real estate developers comply with, and in many cases surpass, the requirements of environmental laws. But he's also so highly regarded by the environmental community that he was one of the 2 winners of the 2007 Advocate Award from the Environmental Advocates of New York. So it's certainly my great pleasure to have Michael. second keynote will be Arthur Huang, and Arthur is always introduced as a young man. I keep telling him, as long as I keep getting older, he will keep being the young man. Arthur has been recognized in many ways for his innovative spirit in the field of sustainable material development, based on today's ever-growing urban trash resources. Again, I'll just mention a few things. He has been recognized and quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, The Economist, National Geographic Channel's Megastructure series, China's CCTV, Nike's Flyknit Collective, and the IDEA Gold Award for the Environment category in 2013. A lot of different forms of global recognition for his work, for his innovation. He graduated from Cornell University's, is it B-Arch? Is that how you pronounce it? That's how I would.
Architecture. Bachelor in
Yeah, Bachelor in Arts. I'm academic, so I will abbreviate everything. Program. Arthur developed a multidisciplinary maker-doer ethos at a young age, inspired by history, structure, engineering, and biology. He later completed graduate study at Harvard's Masters of Architecture II program with a special concentration in green business development, where he investigated the possibility of sustainable economic growth based on renewable resources. We can only have more people doing that. He began this venture by working closely with a manufacturing supply chain in Asia to have an intrinsic understanding of the underlying global production ecosystem. He formally established MiniWiz in 2005-06, and since then the company has grown organically into a profitable international eco-material building module product company, employing 40 full-time international professional engineers, architects, and industrial designers. I'm sure he will tell you more about some of the details of their products and materials. So I won't read these, but it's actually a fascinating list that he's helped to create. I think Michael will speak first, and then Arthur, and then after both have spoken, we'll open to the floor for question and answers. So, Michael.
Thank you, Alistair, and thank you all for coming. Welcome to Columbia University. My job is to kick off the program by talking about the importance of new energy technologies to fighting climate change. Let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about where we are and where we are headed. The last several decades, each has been warmer than the past. These four slides show average global temperatures compared to certain means for those particular areas in the decades of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. Redder is warmer. As you can see, in most parts of the world, it has been getting considerably warmer over the last several decades. Some not so, some a little cooler because of various geographic purposes, but the overall picture is quite clear. And the greatest warming has been in the Arctic and part of the Antarctic areas, which has a lot of consequences in and of itself. Looking forward, just last month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released the first volume of its 5th assessment report, which is the most authoritative international look at the science of what is known about climate change and what are the projections. They looked at a number of scenarios, but one of the scenarios, called the RCP 2.6 scenario, as you see on the left column, is what happens if we take heroic efforts to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We are definitely not heading in that direction, but what happens if we do that? The scenario on the right, called RCP 8.5, is basically a continuation of business as usual emissions. And as you can see, when we look forward to the last 2 decades of the current century, the level of emissions makes a dramatic difference in terms of global temperatures. And that in some parts of the world, the average temperature would increase an unimaginable 11 degrees centigrade. Others would not be quite as bad, but it would be a completely unacceptable situation from continuation of business as usual. The second pair of images is the IPCC's projections under those scenarios about changes in average precipitation One effect of climate change is it tends to make wet places wetter and dry places drier. So the areas that are deserts would be more desert, and the areas that have extreme precipitation would have more of that. The third is what happens to the Arctic ice. And certainly under the business as usual scenario, the Arctic ice essentially disappears during summer, not much less even during the winter. And finally, we have ocean acidification, the phenomenon that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reacts chemically with the water of the ocean, makes the water more acidic, which is very bad for marine life. We know that the sea level has been going up. This depicts the rate of change going back almost a century and a half. And what's significant here is that the rate of sea level rise has been increasing as the slope of the curve has been going up. Looking forward, quite a few scenarios have been presented by the IPCC. Here, starting with a base of the year 2000, which is about 8 inches above what pre-industrial conditions were. Depending on the emission scenario, the sea levels could go up about a meter by the end of the century, and then of course they would keep on going. If we have significant emissions controls, it won't go up that much, but under any scenario, it will go up, which is obviously catastrophic for low-lying areas. The Kyoto Protocol in 1997 is the principal international agreement that tried to achieve the objectives of the 1992 UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, of preventing dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. The Kyoto Protocol set the objective of, between the years 2008 and 2012, reducing global greenhouse gas emissions about 5 percentage points what they had been in 1990. That's not what happened. What this chart shows is the upper horizontal line is what the 1990 baseline. The lower horizontal line is the objective of 5 degrees below the baseline. That was the objective, but instead of the emissions declining to that lower level, they kept on increasing at a very high rate. The largest quantity of the emission increase was in mainland China, then followed by India and Brazil and some of the other rapidly developing countries. The emissions in the United States and and Europe have pretty much flattened out, but those in the rapidly developing countries are going up at a very considerable pace. So where does that leave us? This chart shows some projections just going out to 2050 under several different scenarios. The top line is what will be the greenhouse gas emissions under a continuation of business as usual, the direction where we are now headed. The solid red line below that is what the emissions would be if the countries of the world all carry out the voluntary commitments that they made after the Copenhagen Climate Conference in 2009. As many of you know, after that conference, which was designed to come up with a successor to Kyoto, countries all voluntarily, just about every major country in the world, including the U.S. and mainland China and Taiwan and just about everybody else, made certain kinds of voluntary commitments, non-binding commitments. This is what happens if those are met. And the dashed line below that is what happens if certain additional more aggressive measures are taken. And that takes us to maybe, the top line of business as usual is maybe 3.5 or 4 degrees above pre-industrial conditions. The lower one is maybe 2.5 or 3 degrees above pre-industrial conditions. The lower solid line is where we need to be if we're going to achieve the global objective of keeping to 2 degrees centigrade. And the dashed line below, and that is what was agreed to in Copenhagen, has been reaffirmed several times. The dashed line at the bottom is where we would need to be at 1.5 degrees. 1.5 degrees is the objective sought by the small island nations, because at 1.5 degrees they probably survive, whereas at 2 degrees they drown. But we are far from that. We have an enormous gap in ambition between both in ambition in terms of what we have pledged to achieve, and certainly the top where we are actually achieving. It's an enormous gap. Fortunately, it is possible to fill that gap. The International Energy Agency has come up with what they call the blue map scenario, which is how that gap could be filled, how the energy sector, how the emissions from the energy sector can be reduced sufficiently to get us down to the 2-degree objective. And as you can see, this involves a variety of technological measures. 19% of this would be met by carbon capture and sequestration. I'll return to each of these in a couple of minutes. 17% by renewable energy, 6% by nuclear power, 5% by power generation efficiency and fuel switching, which is largely making electric generating stations more efficient, 15% by end-use fuel switching, which is mostly conversion from coal to natural gas, and finally 38%, by far the largest, by end-use fuel and electricity efficiencies, energy efficiency. So every one of these measures is necessary to a large extent, and if we do every one of these measures, we can fill that gap, and we can prevent the catastrophic impacts that the IPCC and every other major scientific body predicts will happen if we don't get emissions down. So, one of the good news items is that many of these items actually save money. This is a chart put together by the McKinsey consulting firm. The items to the left save money, and the deeper they are, the more money they save. The items to the right cost money. The width of them tells you how much energy they would save, but most of the items to the left are energy efficiency items. So there's tremendous potential to do things that both save energy and reduce greenhouse gases and save money. In thinking about the role of technology, I like to use this formula, which is a slight oversimplification, but not a lot. That impact equals population times affluence times technology. One of the major reasons for the increase in greenhouse gas emissions is growing population. Another is growing affluence. Now, growing population is something that is controlled by public policy measures that are completely outside of environmental law, and we're not going to get into that. And affluence is something that is to be encouraged, and clearly a major reason for the emissions growth is the growing affluence in the rapidly developing countries. But it really means that technology has to do all the work. That in order to keep the emissions down, it really falls upon cleaner technologies to come up with methods of emissions reduction. So the technologies to control climate change can be divided into 5 categories. Here, I'll go back to each. The best is to use less energy, to use energy more efficiently. Second is, to the extent that we do use energy, use lower carbon forms of energy. Third would be capturing the carbon before it gets out of the smokestack into the atmosphere. The fourth would be if we could figure out a way to withdraw the carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere. And fifth, very dangerous, very completely untested, very unpredictable, but we're hearing more and more about it, is attempts at geoengineering to try to reduce the amount of sunlight coming in, to reduce warming in that way. So, using energy more efficiently, the largest single end consumer of energy is buildings, and a great deal can be done to improve the energy efficiency of buildings. I'm happy to say that the building where we are now sitting, the faculty house of Columbia University, was recently renovated in a way that makes it LEED certified, which is definitely a move in the right direction.